Today you will hear from an innovative technology leader at one of the largest healthcare organizations in the country as he tells his story of solving integration between eBuilder Enterprise and Lawson Financial Systems. So without further delay, I'd like to introduce Dennis Clausen, who is the Director of Support and Services for the Facility Management Department at Inova Health Systems. Take it away, Dennis.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Dennis Clausen. I'm the Director for Support Services at the Inova Health System. First, I'd like to give you a little introduction about Inova Health System. As you can see here on the slide, we're a non-for-profit healthcare system based in Northern Virginia. We serve over 2 million people each year in this area. We've got about 5 acute care hospitals and numerous other outpatient facilities, as it says, with like 15,000 employees. We are Northern Virginia's only level 1 trauma center and level 4 neo-intensive care unit. Okay, we also have many other programs at Inova. This just gives you an idea of where we are. We're located to the south and west of Washington, D.C. proper. You can see here on the slide, Inova Fairfax Hospital is our flagship hospital we'll talk about, but we stretch across Fairfax and Loudoun County and the city of Alexandria. As I told you already, I'm the Director of Support Services for Facilities Management Department. That department, in that capacity, I'm responsible for finalizing and tracking of all capital construction project budgets through the life of the projects. We're also responsible for finalizing and tracking the facility operation engineering budgets, which we'll talk more about, and also finalizing and issuing and tracking all contracts and purchase orders associated with the above. Obviously, we're also in charge of all the invoicing associated with that and our integration with eBuilder and the Lawson Financial System, which is our topic today. A little bit of background. The environment that we had before eBuilder is individual project managers manage projects separately. Okay, that involved at the time paper by the cartload, separate spreadsheets, etc. There wasn't much consistency either in how the projects were managed, but there were only about 3 project managers at the time we started this. And the consolidation of project information at the program level or above was very time consuming and hard because it meant somebody had to match the spreadsheets. Corporate headquarters has and continues to require that all payments go out through the financial system, not in some other form. And at the time, the way Lawson, our financial system, was configured, it was not customer friendly for construction projects. We got eBuilder in early 2009 to manage the capital projects. The impetus was for that was an $850 million expansion project at the Fairfax campus, which is an 850-bed hospital and is our flagship hospital. Okay, we use eBuilder, all the modules. Initially, cost control was a major focus. Now we use eBuilder to control virtually everything: RSIs, ASIs, submittals, potential change orders, you name it. We control it with eBuilder because we want everything to be managed uniformly. But we did at the time view the integration as critical to us for the financial system. And as it turns out, after developing it and developing the initial integration for capital projects, we ended up taking control of the engineering departments at the acute care hospitals. So we modified the integration to account for that. And we'll talk about the effect of that in a minute. Just for a little background and a little picture, you are looking from the southeast at the Inova Fairfax Hospital as it existed in 2009. This next picture I'm going to show you is the Inova Fairfax Hospital after the $850 million expansion. The building you were looking at before is the one that the pointer is on here. This building, 240,000 square foot patient tower that adjoins that, was the first major project built for the 850. Then this building, the Women's and Children's Hospital, which is 670,000 square feet, along with a new entrance road, this 800-car parking garage, and then a complete renovation of this building here that you see where the marker is. This is another view of the two buildings that form the basis, the major basis of the $850 million project. Okay, to give you a notion of where we currently are using eBuilder, we have 490 capital construction projects that have been done through eBuilder to date. There are 77 active projects at the moment. The budgets for active capital projects total over about $1.6 billion. That's, of course, across multiple years. But our capital spend has averaged 200 to 400 million per year over the past 8 years. Just to put it in perspective, the $850 million expansion came in $100 million under budget and ahead of schedule, and we're pretty proud of that, and we believe eBuilder played a large part in that. When engineering came on, it added only about $51 million to manage annually, but it increased the number of invoices we processed through the integration by probably a factor of 4, because you pay, a lot more invoices for the stuff that you need to keep the place running. Okay, the eBuilder integration overview, obviously, as you all know, eBuilder provides the ability to manage real time. We wanted our integration to be as real time as we could make it and make sure that we had an integration with a financial system to avoid duplicating effort, to avoid errors of editing things in both your eBuilder system and Lawson system, which is easy to do. And we did do that, as you'll see in the chronology timeline, for almost a year, so we know how painful that was. Okay, now, integration ought to be easy. Lawson's a database, eBuilder's a database. But integration, we found, is not necessarily that easy. The devil is indeed in the details. The first part, and maybe the hardest part about integration, is getting multiple people to agree on how it's going to work. These are the players or major players that we needed involved. Accounts payable, obviously, because it's money going out the door, accounting, the IT department, the IT Lawson team, obviously eBuilder itself, the people in our office to understand how processes and things that work, and then numerous other ancillary people like internal and external auditing. The means of tracking and changing commitments in Lawson as we had it configured, and still have it configured, although we're about to update Lawson, okay, wasn't easily done for us because of the way Lawson handles purchase orders. They think that Lawson tends to think, as Inova has it configured, that a purchase order tends to be one item, and if you need to make a change to a purchase order or a commitment, that you just issue a new one. Well, as most of you know who deal with a construction contract or even an architect contract, there are addendum, there are, potential and change orders issued all the time, so you've got to be able to move that. So that created an issue, okay? And that's when accounting and accounts payable and everybody agreed that we would only integrate the actual invoices paid and the total budget amounts, because we're able to move money within our budgets on the capital projects, so that the integration merely deals with the total budget that is reconciled to Lawson, and the invoices paid. Now that seems easy enough and makes life easier for us. Now, Lawson eBuilder integration steps as we saw them. Finalize the actual data elements that need to be exchanged between the databases. Indeed, this is critical. When you're doing that, one of the lessons learned we have, because when we integrated capital, we approached it one way, and when we integrated the engineering piece, we had to change how much of the data elements were set up, and I'll talk more to that in a second. One of the reasons you want to, if you can, you'd like to hard code certain things in your data elements, but if you hard code them and then you need to change what goes in that data element, you may have to redo your integration. So it's just important to be as comprehensive as you can without running the risk of data being somehow corrupted. Okay. Determine that data elements. We sort of agreed you got to deal with your accounting and everybody else and decide what goes over in bulk. What goes over electronically for us is a reconciliation file that simply says 40 invoices, and we're going to pay $2,672.37. Then there's a file that has the data that matches that. The same exact number of invoices will be listed and has all the payout information that goes in, and I'll show you a little bit about that in a second. A distribution file that says, okay, where do those costs get distributed? Because sometimes you have certain costs that you want distributed to either different cost centers in your organization, or for some reason you have different funding sources involved, or we use it to determine which amounts would be capitalized and which amounts would be expensed on things like applications for payment and stuff like that. And it's our way to talk to the accounting department. And then, of course, goes over a PDF of each of those invoices being paid so they can do any cross-referencing or audit work they want to do. Discussions also involved at the time that what we get back from the integration from the Lawson system are the check dates and whenever the invoice is paid, just to make it easier and so that we can see what we want to see in eBuilder without having to go into Lawson to see when something was paid. Okay, the meat of the work gets together with when your eBuilder reps and your accounting reps get together and say, okay, what's the field and how does it work? Top line here, for example, CVI vendor is what Lawson calls it. It's a 9-character field. It's an alpha field, and it has a company number. Okay. And then the CVI invoice, that had to be a custom field to do it, to meet the requirement to go there, and you can see a field size. And you have to go through the whole field size thing and how it works and what are your limitations so that you don't put in dashes and things like that when you can't have them. I'm not going to read the whole slide to you, but this is where it gets pretty involved to make sure that you got the data elements right and that they're configured right, both in eBuilder, and obviously they're configured the way they're configured pretty much in Lawson. But this is how you get errors when your electronic files go over. If somebody puts in a dash and that field doesn't allow you have a dash because it's purely numeric, or the alpha field has a limited number, and that's a problem. Okay, then you have to determine frequency and timing. For us, you can do them real time, you could do it daily, you could do it weekly. We thought that the best way to handle this was to do it 3 times a week, and basically it coincides with our check runs. We send a file over on a given evening, the check run happens the next morning, and if that check is a pay immediately check that's marked that way, it's going to go out, it's going to be cut in that check run, and it's going to go in the mail the next day, or if we pick it up. And you can see the data here that happens. Everything goes, in our case, it goes to an SFTP site from eBuilder scripted, the data elements I just showed you. Then Lawson picks it up with a script, runs it normally. As long as there's no problem with the file, then the payment data comes back. Okay. Then you have to allocate resources to figure out who's going to do these changes to the scripting. Who's going to add the custom fields in eBuilder? Who's going to write the script at eBuilder to generate this to go out to the SFTP site or other site? And then someone has to do the scut work to make the necessary changes, both on the eBuilder and Lawson side, write the scripts, test them in the beta environment, then put them into the production environment, and then deal with it. Just of note, we do actually reconcile the general ledger between Lawson and eBuilder for all our projects, both capital and engineering, on a monthly basis to ensure they stay in line. Okay, a Lawson chronology for you. Our initial meetings in the summer of 2009, remember we joined eBuilder in 2009. We went live at the end of the summer in 2009. And at that time, we thought, okay, no problem. We'll be able to bring this thing live before the end of the year, which would be convenient for, as you all know, budgetary reasons and other things. But changes of people at Inova, IT, eBuilder could do it faster. I'm sure they could do it faster, although they too have to, allocate resources. But changes in IT people and things like that delayed everything until about April of 2010 before we could actually get back on track with constant, normal every 2-week integration meetings to have it happen. Competing requirements, mostly on the Inova side, certainly, delayed how it went from the script is right, yeah, we all agree, sign it off, into beta testing, sign it off, test to go live, and it finally went live in October 10. Could it be done shorter than that? Certainly when we integrated the engineering accounts, which did require us changing some custom fields and adding some, making some changes to that, the integration went much more quickly, probably a month, 6 weeks, we were done pretty much from start to finish. Now, why do it? Pretty straightforward, I think. The savings involved are considerable. We probably saved 1 FT out of 3 who were initially loading invoices manually in Lawson, because what you had to do is you had to load them into Lawson, you had to approve the payment out because they were using a global payment because of that problem with commitments. Then you had to send the paper over. It would go over to AP. When AP got it, they would match all the information, and that's how it went out. This way, it all goes electronically to them. That doesn't happen. It sped the processing of payments for both IFM&D and accounts payable, because once they run the script, as long as the scripts don't fail, as long as the data is clean, the scripts don't fail, and they don't fail very often, maybe once a month or whatever over something that somebody entered in error, which is pretty good given that it runs, 18 to 20 times a month. It eliminates the errors, as we discussed before, by, multiple people entering the same data. It saved additional FTE equivalents when engineering was integrated, because that was a lot more invoice being processed in the way I just described. Slowly over time, we've moved to processing invoices more electronically, but it has not sped it up. To give you an idea of how it changed what we did, it would take, potentially for an application for payment in the paper days, it would move from the, as it usually does, from the GC to the architect to the project manager, and depending on the level of payment, through several approval levels, And then before it got entered into Lawson, it could take easily 30 days for that to get processed. We average now 10 or 11 days from the day the GC puts it in to eBuilder until it's paid out the door. We average like 2 to 3 days for the average invoice that comes in because it doesn't have as many review steps. Also, you can note in the last bullet, you can save FTE hours if you allow major vendors to enter invoices. We allow the general contractors for sure to enter their applications for payment. We allow some other major vendors to do it, but not many, because there tends to be a problem unless they deal with you all the time and enter a lot of invoices. Generally, it's easier for somebody to send it to you as a PDF and get our people to enter it, because we know what we're looking for to avoid data entries of those invoices. Now, hopefully that's given you all an overview of how we dealt with the integration here. I'm happy to answer questions that anybody might have concerning the integration, eBuilder, or anything you'd like.
Okay, thank you, Dennis. That was a great story. So we heard some key insights about Inova's integration experience. So prior to eBuilder, Dennis, it sounded like there were challenges with consolidated reporting at the program level, which was time-consuming and inconsistent. It was something we hear quite frequently. It was a paper-based process using a lot of disconnected tools like Excel spreadsheets or disparate file folders to manage the reporting process, and it was causing a lot of issues with synchronization and updating, I'm sure. And then after Inova's implementation of eBuilder and the integration with Lawson, you realized a lot of big labor hour savings to the tune of, it sounds like, several FTE employees, significantly sped up the processing of payments in both your facilities management organization and the accounts payable department. And in addition, you were able to eliminate a lot of errors in data duplication and payment processing. So lots of key benefits to what were some pretty big challenges up front. So these are all great accomplishments that any company would be proud of. So I'd like to turn it over, as Dennis said, to Q&A, and it looks like actually we have quite a few questions. So we'll do our best to get through them all. And if we don't get through them all, then we'll try to email out some answers to the ones that we don't get to. So let's see how we do. So I'm just going to sort of read them in the order that they came in. So first question up. So Dennis, you mentioned that a decision was made to have eBuilder manage all commitment information due to issues with how POs were set up in Lawson. Do these commitments no longer have POs associated with them in Lawson? Does that question make sense?
Yes. For us, they no longer have POs associated with them in our current configuration of Lawson. My understanding is that it can be integrated, and other people have done it. I think Arlington County in Texas has integrated that, and it's a matter of whether your accounting and financial people want it to be able to overwrite certain fields in Lawson, is my understanding. At the time, our folks didn't want to have to go to Lawson and have them rewrite the scripts to allow that to happen, because there were limits in Lawson of how it worked. So that's what was driving that train. But my understanding is that it can be done if you're willing, to spend the money and time, because it's going to take somebody's time to reconfigure Lawson to accept, changes to purchase orders other than the life cycle. The way our purchase orders worked here, you could put in a purchase order for amount, and then if you couldn't change it, you just cut a new purchase order for what you needed to do to change it, because of the limitations of who can change what in there. That can all be modified. It too is just a database, so it can happen.
Okay, very good. Next question. If known, can you share the number of FTEs that were required from your internal team to implement the integration? That is, in parentheses, IT, accounts payable, accounting, etc. So basically, I think he's asking how much of your internal Inova team was involved with the integration.
There were two of us internally for support services, my eBuilder administrator and myself, involved from accounting. There was limited involvement. They're the accounting was the one who had to agree in finance that we did or didn't want to integrate purchase orders, and they did or didn't want to have a record of it. We give them access to eBuilder. That's fine with them. They don't need any more. If they need to see a purchase order, they get it that way. So that was only one person. From the Lawson team and IT, there were generally two people who were involved in the integration off and on. That covers the main involvement because we didn't have to do, except for writing some Lawson script that the team could do about how the data came into it, the Lawson team. It didn't involve, corporate Lawson involved, and obviously it involved eBuilder to write the scripts that they needed to script internal to eBuilder. So it was limited, and everybody's involvement was certainly not full time to get the integration up and running. That's part of what took so long is you got to program people's time.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Dennis. Next question. This is a general question. Do you integrate budgets between eBuilder and Lawson?
Yes, we do, but only at the top number level do we integrate them between Lawson and eBuilder on the capital side. And when I say that, I mean if we have a capital project approved for $22.5 million, then that's the number that Lawson cares about keeping track of what is against that number. And we do provide through another system that views capital projects the total commitment information, but not the commitment data itself. And it doesn't go to Lawson. In engineering, we do track the budgets off against the same, I'll call them expense codes. I don't know what other financial systems. For us, there's a cost center, which is where you charge the cost to, and then there's an expense code. On the engineering side, we track by expense code. We do track by a Lawson account category, which is similar on the capital side, because that's how we tell accounting. The data is there, as I said earlier, what to expense versus what to capitalize. That's a final decision that they make, but that's our recommendations.
Okay.
That answer it?
Yeah, I think that answered the question well, Dennis. Thank you. Here's an interesting question. This one may not be so quick for you to answer because I know something about the process, but I'm going to see if maybe you can summarize it quickly for us. How did you obtain approval from a financial perspective to purchase eBuilder, and have you tracked your ROI?
Well, how we obtained approval is that we, in effect, report and have reported for quite some time through the CFO of the system, who approves many things. And when we went with eBuilder, we simply got approval from our boss, and then finally the CFO, to use eBuilder because everybody agreed that there was a need to do this when that big project was coming, and for all the projects. And since then, the finance and accounting side of the house is thrilled with the result. Have we done a real ROI? We did an ROI initially, for example, on the first project we did. We're confident just on printing because we bid the subcontractors separately that we probably saved the cost of the eBuilder implementation on the printing bill alone that would have been involved with 230 subcontractors when you did the bidding. So we're pretty comfortable that it does that. It's pretty hard, in my view, to do an ROI on what you're saving other than the FTEs and things like that. You could turn that into, dollars of cost because of what you're saving versus, the licensing fees, because it's, what you saved and license fees, but it's pretty hard to relate the two. In other words, how do you know, how do you get to that number? So it's not something that anybody, has super asked us to try and quantify. And so fortunately we haven't needed to, because I would think it'd be very hard. I'm happy to talk more about that if somebody wants to point that question more directly.
Yeah, so to that point, Dennis, the good news is we must have a very engaged audience, because there are actually a very large number of very specific questions, which is great. We will not get to all of these questions for sure. So in the interest of time, what I'm going to do, I'll ask a few more, but I think, Dennis, we'll send you a list of the questions, and then the ones that you feel comfortable answering, we'll type up and we'll send out as an email to everyone who registered on the webinar. So I will have to say this was probably a record number of questions that we've had on a webinar. So a lot of very engaged people with a lot of interesting questions. So that's really good news. So I'm just going to cherry pick a few of them. As I said, we won't be able to get to all of them. So let's see. I'll pick a couple of good ones. Let's see, there's a good one. So how do you process invoices for engineering versus capital projects?
Well, they process the same way. It's just, who the approvals levels are. Invoices can be entered by anybody who happens to get them, because if we have our way, we get them as a PDF mailed from the vendors, and we're more successful doing that on the capital side, because it's the same vendors all the time. On the engineering side, they're normally, even if they show up in paper somehow to engineering or whatever, they're entered by their administrative coordinators at each of the OUs generally, and put in the system, depending how we get them, because that's another long, sad story. They're entered there, they're approved by the appropriate people in the engineering department itself, and then they come over to us, and I and one of my team will look at every invoice that comes through before it goes over in the integration to make sure that the numbers do match and it makes sense, and because we're a nonprofit, that it doesn't include tax, because not every vendor takes it off and that sort of thing. Same thing happens on the capital side, but the invoices obviously have a different route. They go to the project manager, they go to the FF&E manager if it involves materials or equipment, and then they, will go, depending on the level of approval, to me and then even my boss for invoices that are over $250,000 payout. They'll go to him for approval before they then get verified and go over for payment. Does that answer it, I hope?
I think so, Dennis. Thank you.
It's all done through eBuilder workflows. As I said earlier, we're passionate about that. We use workflows to track everything, so it's all electronic. We put paper in this thing and then we throw it away. We went from having probably 20 filing cabinets full of papers for invoices to having none. We turned where we used to keep files into an office.
Okay, last question in the interest of time. Let me pick a good one that I think a lot of people would be interested in. So is the first point of invoice entry in Lawson or eBuilder, or both, or does it matter?
No, it's always in eBuilder, because invoices don't go into Lawson per se. at least here, and I don't think they do. Maybe they do, depending on other Lawson applications. By and large, invoices are stored. If they come into accounts payable, we'll get them out of the system that they keep them in, and we'll process them through eBuilder, and they won't get processed through that other system, so that we can keep the accounts aligned. Other invoices come directly to us as PDF or paper. We turn them into a PDF and process them. The same thing happens on the engineering side. Invoices never per se start in Lawson. They sometimes start an account payable, but we've got an agreement with them that if invoices come into accounts payable that are ours, they get sent to us.
Okay, that's all we have time for today. So I want to thank you, Dennis, for a really excellent and informative description and story about the integration. And thanks, everyone, for joining our webinar today. Have a great day.